Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker didn't stop at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. It disconnected. That distinction matters, because according to investigators, the device didn't fail inside her Catalina Foothills home. It moved beyond the range of the monitoring phone sitting beside her bed. The same phone Nancy Guthrie placed in the exact spot every single night before sleeping. Routine. Predictable. Ordinary. And then, suddenly, not ordinary at all. An 84-year-old woman vanished from a gated Tucson property in the middle of the night without triggering an alarm, without contacting family, and without leaving behind a single confirmed sighting after she walked through her front door hours earlier. The last person known to have driven her home was her son-in-law. The garage door closed, and for the next 14 hours, silence settled over the desert. That silence has now become the center of one of the most unsettling missing persons investigations in Arizona. Because investigators are no longer asking whether Nancy disappeared. They are asking who knew enough about her life to make her disappear without resistance. Nancy Guthrie had lived in the Catalina Foothills long enough to understand the rhythm of the desert. At night, the neighborhood changes. The roads are empty. Porch lights sit alone against stretches of darkness. Wind moves through Palo Verde branches and rattles dry cactus needles across stone walkways. The sound travels strangely there. Distance feels larger than it is. Nancy liked that quiet. Friends described her as independent, sharp, socially active, and deeply connected to her family and church community. She was 84 years old, but by every public account, she still insisted on managing her own routines. Dinner plans, medication, errands, game nights with family. On January 31st, she traveled to her daughter Annie's house for dinner. Records reportedly show an Uber brought her there shortly after 5:30 p.m. hours later. Annie's husband, Tommaso, drove Nancy back home. That drive may now be one of the most important stretches of road in this entire investigation, because nobody outside the family has publicly confirmed what happened after Nancy arrived back at the property. No verified surveillance footage. No neighbor statement. No independent witness. Only the timeline. Nancy's nightly routine mattered. Investigators focused on it almost immediately. Around 10 p.m., she typically removed her hearing aids before bed. Without them, she could not hear movement elsewhere in the home. No footsteps, no voices, no door opening in another room. The house reportedly had no actively recording security system, no overnight caretaker, no emergency pendant, and the family dog that once lived at the property had died months earlier. Separately, those details sound harmless. Together, investigators viewed them differently, because in crimes involving elderly victims, vulnerabilities are rarely random. They become opportunities. Then came another detail investigators reportedly found difficult to ignore. Evidence suggested someone may have been studying the property before Nancy vanished. Items near the patio appeared repositioned across several weekends before February 1st. Subtle changes. Small enough that most people would never notice them. But investigators believe the movement suggested somebody was learning the layout of the home and surrounding entry points. And then came the image that changed the tone of the case entirely. A masked figure, captured briefly near the residence in the early morning darkness. Not running, not panicking, deliberate. The gated entry to Nancy's property reportedly could not be opened from outside without access, which raised a question investigators still have not answered publicly. How did someone get in? And maybe more importantly, who already knew how? The ransom letters pulled public attention away from something investigators quietly considered far more disturbing. According to reports, the notes referenced details from inside Nancy's home that an outsider should not have known. At that point, investigators stopped asking whether the letters were real. They started asking who had first-hand knowledge of the scene. The first wave of public discussion around Nancy Guthrie's disappearance focused on fear. A masked intruder, a possible abduction, a wealthy family targeted in the middle of the night. But investigators reportedly moved toward a narrower theory very quickly. Not random violence. Access. That shift matters because random offenders leave chaos behind. Forced entries. Unpredictable movement. Mistakes. Organized offenders move differently. They understand routines before they act. They know when a victim sleeps. They know which cameras work. They know who lives alone. And in Nancy's case, investigators reportedly began examining whether someone close to her life already understood those vulnerabilities long before February 1st. Then came the pacemaker data. According to multiple reports surrounding the investigation, the device recorded unusual activity before disconnecting from its paired monitoring system. Investigators allegedly analyzed movement patterns, timing disruptions, and cardiac irregularities during Nancy's final known hours inside the home. That data may now represent the closest thing investigators have to a silent witness. Because unlike human memory, electronic devices do not panic. They record. And if the FBI believes that information matters enough to keep major portions of the investigation sealed, then whatever they found inside that timeline may be more significant than the public currently understands. Then investigators reportedly uncovered another thread running beneath the disappearance. Money, not dramatic wealth, not hidden offshore accounts, property, ownership, inheritance, and a financial timeline that began months before Nancy vanished. Public records show Nancy Guthrie's Catalina Foothills property carried significant value. That alone means nothing. But financial investigators are trained to examine what changes when a vulnerable property owner suddenly disappears. Who gains access? Who benefits? Who expected something to happen? Months before Nancy vanished, legal documents involving financial authority reportedly surfaced publicly. Around the same period, reporting from independent outlets claimed Nancy had declined a request for financial assistance from within the family. That claim remains unconfirmed by law enforcement. But investigators reportedly did not dismiss it, because motive is rarely built from one dramatic event. It is built from pressure accumulating quietly over time. Financial stress, access to property, control over assets, expectation, and then investigators reportedly noticed another pattern after Nancy disappeared. Activity at the home itself. Photographs circulated online showing family members moving boxes and personal items from the property, while the investigation remained active. Vehicles arrived and left repeatedly. Belongings were reportedly removed before any official declaration of death or probate resolution became public. Legally, there can be innocent explanations for activity inside a missing person's residence. Investigatively, timing matters, because detectives do not just study actions. They study confidence. People behave differently when they believe someone is coming back, and differently again when they believe they are not. Then came one of the most debated details in the entire investigation, the 7-minute gap. According to publicly discussed timelines, family members arrived at Nancy's home shortly before noon on February 1st. The 911 call reporting her missing came several minutes later. Investigators reportedly recovered visible blood evidence near the property entrance, which raised an uncomfortable question. What happened during those minutes before emergency services were contacted? Investigators have never publicly answered that question, and neither has the family. The 911 call itself reportedly remains sealed. That decision became another turning point, because in Arizona, emergency calls often become public quickly in high-profile cases. Retired investigators speaking publicly about the case suggested the recording may contain information detectives consider important enough to preserve for future proceedings. One former investigator reportedly made a statement that changed how many viewers interpreted the silence surrounding the case. Do not expect the recording to surface before trial date. That single word, trial, shifted public speculation immediately, because investigators do not preserve evidence this aggressively unless they believe it may eventually matter in court. Then federal investigators reportedly expanded the forensic search, not because the case was slowing down, because they believed something inside the original crime scene had been missed the first time, and what they reportedly recovered changed the scope of the investigation again. Federal forensic teams reportedly conducted secondary evidence sweeps inside Nancy Guthrie's home weeks after the initial investigation began. Hair samples, surface DNA, additional trace evidence. According to reports, some of that material was submitted to advanced forensic laboratories capable of conducting high-level comparative analysis. And then another critical detail emerged. The DNA reportedly did not produce a Cody's match, meaning whoever left that material behind may never have been arrested, processed, or entered into the National Criminal Database. That detail matters, because public imagination often pictures dangerous offenders as visible criminals with long histories. Real investigations frequently look different. Sometimes the people closest to a crime scene appear completely ordinary. No criminal record, no prior arrests, no public warning signs, just access, routine, trust. Investigators also reportedly seized and examined a family vehicle connected to the case for an unusually extended period of time. Former detectives publicly noted that long forensic holds often indicate investigators are searching for extremely specific evidence rather than conducting a routine review. Again, that does not prove guilt, but investigators measure resources carefully. They do not commit weeks of forensic processing without investigative purpose. Meanwhile, public silence around the case deepened. Questions involving the ransom notes remained unanswered. Questions involving the drive home remained unanswered. Questions involving the 7-minute delay remained unanswered. And in criminal investigations, silence itself becomes something detectives analyze. Who speaks immediately? Who avoids details? Who clarifies timelines? Who doesn't? Retired investigators repeatedly pointed to one uncomfortable reality about cases involving elderly victims. The greatest threat often comes from someone already trusted by the victim, not strangers, not masked intruders from nowhere. People already inside the victim's world. That possibility became even harder to ignore after reports surfaced that NBC News had quietly prepared internal procedures for handling major developments involving the case on air due to Savannah Guthrie's connection to the investigation. Networks do not build contingency plans without expectation. They prepare because they believe movement may come. And according to investigators close to the case, movement may already be happening behind closed doors. But one detail still hangs over every theory investigators have explored. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. If this operation was planned, organized, and controlled, whoever carried it out likely understood her life before the crime ever began. Cases involving elderly victims expose a reality most families do not want to confront. Safety is often assumed long before it is actually built. Nancy Guthrie reportedly lived alone in a gated home without active overnight monitoring, without functioning recording systems, and without emergency response protection immediately accessible beside her bed. Those gaps may not seem extraordinary individually, but investigators examined systems, not isolated details. And this case revealed how easily vulnerable adults can disappear when routine becomes predictable. That is the deeper issue investigators and elder care experts continue returning to. Not just who took Nancy, but how an 84-year-old woman could become so exposed inside her own home without anyone recognizing the risk accumulating around her. Because once investigators began reconstructing the final known timeline, the picture became difficult to ignore. A predictable nightly routine, limited hearing after removing hearing aids, minimal active surveillance, knowledge of the property layout, potential prior observation of the home, possible financial tension, and a disappearance executed during the narrowest window of vulnerability. Then came the part investigators reportedly treated with extreme caution: the sealed evidence, the withheld details, the restricted forensic information. Publicly, law enforcement has released very little. Privately, former investigators analyzing the case believe that silence may indicate something else entirely. Not confusion, preparation. Because when investigators believe future charges are possible, they protect details aggressively. They avoid contaminating testimony. They restrict evidence flow. They preserve timelines that only the responsible person would fully recognize. And if that is what is happening here, then investigators may already know far more than they are willing to say publicly. Which leads to the question hanging over every development in this case. If someone close to Nancy Guthrie knew exactly when she would be vulnerable, how long had they been planning around that knowledge? 3 months into the investigation, Nancy Guthrie remains missing. No confirmed public sighting, no verified recovery, no arrests, but the case no longer resembles a random disappearance. Investigators reportedly believe planning occurred before February 1st. They reportedly believe the property was studied. They reportedly believe the timeline inside the home matters more than the public understands. And they reportedly believe critical evidence still exists inside sealed records, forensic analysis, and electronic data connected to Nancy's final known hours. The last confirmed people to see Nancy alive remains central to the public timeline. The final drive home remains unverified by outside witnesses. The 7-minute delay before the 911 call remains unexplained publicly. The ransom letters remain controversial. The financial questions remain unresolved. And the pacemaker data, the detail that first transformed this case from a missing persons investigation into something darker, may still contain answers investigators have not revealed. What makes this case linger is not only the mystery. It is the possibility that the truth may have existed inside Nancy's daily life long before she disappeared. Not hidden in some distant criminal network, not buried deep in the desert, but sitting quietly inside ordinary routines no one questioned until it was too late. And if investigators are right, someone already knows exactly what happened after that garage door closed. An 84-year-old woman vanished from a gated home in the middle of the night. No confirmed forced entry. No confirmed public suspect. No confirmed explanation. But investigators reportedly uncovered signs of planning, access, and prior knowledge surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Details that continue pushing this case away from randomness and closer toward intent. The FBI remains involved. The investigation remains active. And somewhere inside sealed evidence, electronic records, forensic timelines, and unanswered interviews, detectives believe the truth still exists. So here's the question this case leaves behind. When vulnerable elderly people live alone with valuable property, predictable routines, and limited protection, how many warning signs do families and institutions overlook before a tragedy finally forces attention? And if someone close to Nancy knows more than they have said publicly, investigators are betting pressure eventually changes silence into cooperation. Because cases like this rarely stay silent forever.